Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Magic and the Other Guy. And you join Kevin and myself, as ever, outside my home here in Charlotte on the banks of Lake Wylie. It is beautifully sunny and clear today, Kevin.
It is. It's a very nice wintry day.
No rain. It was actually below freezing when I woke up this morning, but it seems to have lifted up a little bit in temperature, so it's not that cold now. But
well, too, the sun hits this porch right when we're usually doing this, so that kind of definitely helps.
Yes.
So it's quite nice out, considering.
Here we are, episode 19. As ever, I never know what we're going to be talking about, so fill us all in. What are we going to be talking about?
Well, of course, back in the early episodes, we covered some TV and we covered some movies. But there's so much more to all that I figured today we'd go a little subgenre and talk about just sci-fi.
Oh.
And which is a subject that could be talked about for hours upon hours upon hours, especially if you are a fervent fan or collector in that realm.
Yeah.
But let's touch on our experiences with just that.
Yes. I am a big fan of Star Wars, so that's always going to be my starting point, I think, with sci-fi, and possibly, if we can include Doctor Who, that's science fiction. Yeah, let's include Doctor Who, because I remember watching that as a kid, and Star Trek, of course. But how about you? What's your sort of first memories of getting involved with science fiction?
Well, I was thinking about it, planning, this idea, and if Star Wars was definitely the major turning point, no doubt about it. I was 8 when that happened. But prior to that, there was Star Trek, which I think we talked on it before. It's just, I don't think I got into it because I just don't remember it being on. It would have had to be in reruns, and it kind of depended on what your local channels and stuff showed. And I just don't remember it being there. So I knew of it, and occasionally friends would have some toys, but I just never really picked up on it.
Yeah.
And then Space 1999 was earlier than Star Wars, and that was on, I'm sure, on Saturday mornings some. But again, I kind of remember it being there, but not always. It wasn't like I would make sure I watched it. I would catch it occasionally and whatever. And I do remember there was a Saturday morning show called, and this was prior to Star Wars, called Arc 2.
Arc 2?
Arc 2.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
And it was I guess a half-hour Saturday morning show. It might have been an hour. But it was this family, and they traveled the wastelands in like the 25th century or something like that in this kind of RV-looking thing. And they had
cool. The Wastelands of Earth. Was
I
okay.
assume it was post-apocalyptic wastelands. And it was kind of a neat RV. It kind of had where each wheel would be 3 wheels. They kind of spun together. And,
cool.
And it was a custom-built thing for the movie. And it was a family, and they also had a chimpanzee, and I think he could talk, the best I can recall.
Yes.
And they had this cool little, when they wanted to go for more outings from the RV, there was this vehicle that would drive out of the back. And of course, I loved anything with wheels.
Sure.
So, and they drive that off. But they would, encounter other cultures and other tribes and stuff like that.
Yes.
So that was all prior to Star Wars. And then I remember vividly we were watching something in '77, obviously, and the trailer for Star Wars came on TV. And I remember just coming away from that going, what was that?
That's right.
And back then I drew everything. I was just always sketching and drawing.
Yeah.
So I drew a picture that evening, and I still have it.
No kidding.
If you can believe that.
Yeah,
I know you
I'd say
can.
no kidding. I can believe it, yeah.
So I'll probably dig that up and maybe post it. But that was, after that, it was like the boom of sci-fi in my world was just Star Wars on.
Yes. Now, you mentioned Space 1999, and I can remember that vividly. And the thing that I was most attracted to about that was the really cool spaceships that they had. Even the industrial, if you like, the transporter ships, the Eagles and things. They were so cool. They seemed to be very much based on insects and wildlife, which is still a current thing, I think, isn't it? When you look at how science fiction prop designers or costume designers or vehicle designers work, they always seem to be influenced by wildlife, and I think so anyway. And I remember the Eagles from Space 1999 were very attractive, and I did have a model of one of the Eagles with the removable cargo hold in the middle and the sort of space frame structure that went across the middle, like the chassis. Yes, like the exoskeleton, exactly. Yeah, and I loved that. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
cool.
they were kind of ahead of their time with that one.
Yeah.
But I also think a lot of that probably in the early 70s probably came from, interest in the space race. Once we landed on the moon and that was such a big thing leading up to that and then post that, I think that fueled, those kind of shows and stuff like that and kind of got people interested in, worlds beyond and stuff like that.
And thankfully, because of the internet and YouTube now, a lot of those old series, those old episodes of any science fiction series, most of them are out there. And I did watch a couple of episodes of Space 1999 fairly recently, and the thing that struck me about them is all the vehicles still look very cool.
Yeah.
But boy, the pacing of those 60s, 70s shows, they were so slow. Like,
yes.
Scenes would last 5 minutes and nothing really would happen. And at the time, of course, we got here from there, as I always say about a lot of things, and we improved in the world of TV.
Well, you kind of wonder if some of that, maybe their idea of filming it and how they filmed it was somewhat based on 2001: A Space Odyssey, because there were so many slow, drawn-out shots in that.
Yeah,
and it was
in 2001.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's a very slow-paced movie, so maybe they took from that and said, well, this was kind of an important movie involving space, let's carry that over.
That one scene, now you're thinking about 2001, I know we're sort of hopping around, but we always do that. There's one scene in 2001 where HAL 9000, the computer, is watching the astronauts, Dave Bowman and one other, before the plot unfolds and one other disappears. And the two astronauts are sitting inside one of the pods. The classic line, open the pod bay door, Hal. There's two astronauts are sitting inside one of the pods to get away from Hal so they can have a private conversation.
Yes.
And Hal is lip reading what they're saying through the window, right?
Yeah,
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I just remember that scene, through the portal. And the scene seemed to go on forever. But, you're never going to complain. It's a bit like, people complaining about the Beatles' White Album. And I remember McCartney saying, hey, it's the White Album. We've got nothing to apologise for, and it's the same with Kubrick in 2001. He's got nothing to apologise for. It's a brilliant movie.
Yeah.
But a lot of those shows are available on YouTube, thankfully. But like you, I do remember my first introduction to Star Wars was not an advert on the television, but I remember being in Loughborough, which is the nearest town to my little village where I grew up. And there seemed to be a lot of adverts for things and posters for things saying a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And of course, no one knew what it was. And I just remember coming back home from one day and one Saturday afternoon and thinking, what is this? What am I missing? And of course, like you say, boom, out comes the movie, and the world will never be the same.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine how. I mean, sure, there's many documentaries on how it was all, developed and pitched, but can you imagine being an executive and them coming in and telling you what it is and them looking at it going, it's the bunch of, and you got a space monkey in here, and what else, what's going on here?
Yes, I mean, thank goodness everything went according to plan and we ended up with the movie being made. And yes, I'm sure it was absolutely touching.
Well, it was, of course, summer of '77 here. Do you remember when it was? Was it pretty much on that same time?
Pretty much the same time.
Yeah,
my memory is 70s.
They kept that one fairly on the same thing, because London, I think, was a big. And they filmed in England too. I think didn't they film a lot?
Yeah, I think they still do. Yeah. Shepperton Studios, right? I
can't remember which one they did, but I think a lot of.
I think a lot of movies still make use. Thankfully, it's good to see. Actually, Shepperton Studios still get used a lot. I know a lot of the Bond movies are shot there, and I think Star Wars, even to this day, I think they still have a.
I would think so.
They still use Shepperton.
Well,
and now, as the years have gone on, one of the cool things we've often chatted about. We have this love of collecting things and a love of engineering, and you just said anything with wheels, and I'm a big fan of science fiction vehicles and all of that, as we just chatted about. And I know when the later movies were being made, whether it's the prequels or the sequel 3, when the prop designers were saying, there was nothing left of the original Millennium Falcon, for example, and they were studying photographs and they were studying images and drawings of it, and then they went to Shepperton to see if there was anything left in Shepperton. They had to reproduce everything. I think that would have been so cool.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine being involved in that project, like trying to piece back together the Millennium Falcon, whatever it would be. I think that's just an amazing.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating part of movie making, is being in the prop world.
Yes, and I don't know, we may have touched upon it on another episode of Matched and the Other Guy, but of course one of the key attractions, I believe, to Star Wars is the way that George Lucas and his team deliberately went about making everything look dated and used and worn, and on the point of breaking down. Before that, I mean, again, when you look at the first series of Star Trek, everything looks brand new all the time. You know, that was
which is kind of, it looks more like military, where everything is spit and shine.
Everything was polished, everything looked brand new. There was no wear and tear on anything.
Yep.
Yes, and in my experience, and I may be wrong, but in my experience, Star Wars was the first franchise to break away from that idea of everything in the future looks brand new.
Yeah.
Why should it look brand new just because it's in the future? And that's been copied over and over and over now, and to give it a more realistic sense of authenticity. And I like that. I like to see the ships that have blaster marks on them and burn marks and uniforms that are a little bit torn, and I like that.
Well, and we may have touched on this too, but you go a couple of years later into Alien, which of course is probably the greatest sci-fi / horror film of all time.
Yes.
And the Nostromo and the crew looked like normal people. They were just blue collar workers, and they looked. Harry Dean Stanton's character wore like a Hawaiian shirt under his jacket, and he had an oily cap because he worked in the mechanicals and stuff. He was always getting filthy dirty.
It looked like a freighter. It looked like a freighter, didn't it?
It looked like it was supposed to do. And on top of that, I've always said that movie could be set. It's going to be the same 100 years from now as it was in '79 when it came out. It's timeless in when it could have been.
Yes.
Granted, the kind of the lights, in the computer room, the mother where the mother of the computer is, it kind of looks a little dated.
Yes, I know.
Again, you can still let that go and say.
So, the understanding and the advancement of electronics has shifted so much in the last 3 decades that now that is showing up as being a flaw, if you like, in future technology. But beyond that, you're right. Everything in Alien still looks correct and believable, and the same with Star Wars. Everything looks correct and believable to me. There'd be nothing you would change in the Star Wars universe. But again, George Lucas and the guys, just did the most tremendous job. And if you think back to some of the visual displays, the computer type displays that we used in Star Wars, for example, the guidance computers that were used to find the little exhaust vent on the bombing run towards the end of the Death Star, and you have those sort of very sort of janky looking sort of blip, 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 little images.
Looks like an early 80s video game.
It looks like an early 80s video game, but I think George Lucas and the guys have been very good in carrying that along and still continuing to use it, not trying to update it as if this is still the technology we wanted to use. I think that's a great way of handling that.
Well, if you think about it too, and you look at them, flying through the chasm, and they look at that, it's kind of a simple grid. It's like, don't overcomplicate it. Yeah. Here's the grid. There's the dot. Aim for the dot.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they did that very well. The other thing I've noticed also, actually, in Star Wars recently is this wonderful use of different fonts where they've created, when George Lucas has gone back and recreated and worked on those early movies, inserted the different fonts back into that, so that there is an alien font that runs through, or if you like, a galactic font that runs right through, which isn't English based. It's kind of cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, of course, a lot of people are, people say he should have never gone back and retouched it, and that's a whole other, argument.
I don't. My opinion on that is simply this: they belong to George Lucas, in my opinion, and George can do exactly what he wants with them.
They are my babies, and like them or don't.
I think that an absolutely microcosm version of what George Lucas and his movies are like. I think if I wanted to go back into anything that I'd written and change a sentence because I didn't think it looked right, or change a paragraph, or move something around, I believe I've got the perfect right and freedom to do that of my own books, and I hope
sometimes none of my readers, your own peril, but
I hope none of my readers will be upset by it. But if they were, I'd have to say, well, I'm sorry you're upset by it, but I would prefer my work to look like this. I want it to be better. I always wanted it to be better, and I think that's exactly what George did with his movies. He wanted to make them better. Yeah.
Well, one thing you'll get a little kick out of this is looking back at Star Trek. When I would see it as a kid occasionally or something like that, this was always fun because the part of the Enterprise, that huge disc,
yes,
the main part of the ship.
Yeah.
Well, and what I always thought, because when you see the bridge is round. So I always thought that whole thing was the bridge. So I could never figure out when they went to the elevator and went somewhere, I'm like, where do they go? Are they going down that shaft, down to that tube? I'm like, where on earth do they go in this thing when they leave the bridge? So, and then you come later to realize the bridge is just that tiny part at the bottom.
Yes, it's a much bigger.
And there's a huge, multi-rooms and multi-this, that, and the other. But as a kid, I could never figure out where on earth they're going.
I think the Enterprise, though, talking about cool spaceships and cool design, the Enterprise is another just an iconic design.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They always say, like, animated characters, what do they look like in silhouette? Because that's the indication of a good animation or a good design of an animated character. What do they look like in silhouette? And again, you could recognize the Enterprise as a silhouette instantly, couldn't you? It's just a beautiful, beautiful shape. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and two, we talked about how in Star Trek everything looked, kind of more, clean and crisp and everything. But I'd always kind of said that it looked like the Enterprise was like a brand new Cadillac, but yet the Klingons always looked like they were driving 30-year-old Ramblers, Their stuff always looked like they were barely keeping them together. And,
I see on the inside, you mean?
Yeah.
Like, yes,
in the outside, you kind of look more.
I mean, I kind of like the Klingon warbird shape. That's, with those sort of the drooping wings, for want of a better, I don't know what, I don't know if you have wings on a spaceship, but the drooping wings towards the rear and that long neck on the warbirds. I thought they
bulbous head at the
front. I think that's another very cool design. Boy,
well, and two, weren't in the original series, weren't both a Romulan ship and a Klingon ship both called Birds of Prey?
Well, I think there is and I'm no great expert on Star Trek, and I suspect already there will be folks.
I know there's probably some going, no, it's exactly this and this.
But my understanding is that there is a connection between the Romulans and the Klingons.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a reason, but part of me always said, could you have thought of a different name for the other ones?
Yes,
machines. But anyway, like I said, there's probably some exact reason, and somebody knows exactly why it happened.
Star Trek enthusiasts, do let us know what the connection is. I'm not an expert, but I am sure that I am aware that there is a connection between Romulans and Klingons. Yes, maybe they're cousins or something.
Well, again, talking about going back to where Star Wars kind of changed everything. I mean, from that point on, you could just tell that everybody was jumping on the space bandwagon.
Right.
Because later in 1977, and very few people will probably remember this, but it's kind of like, oh my gosh, there was a little half-hour show called Quark. And it was a comedy. Yeah. And what it was they flew around space in a garbage scow. And they would collect space garbage. And it was a kind of a sitcom. Yeah. But very short-lived, probably a season or less. It starred Richard Benjamin, which was a comedic actor. But I remember vividly watching that. Of course, it was anything that had to do with space after Star Wars, I was going to give a try and lock in on. And I remember watching that. I remember being babysat at my cousin's house and watching it over at their house. Came and went.
I wonder what happened to that. Well, yes, I think that idea of different TV networks and different movie producers latching onto an idea that wins is still current today, isn't it?
Yes,
you get one thing that works, and then there are endless spin-offs of slightly different varieties of it. Yeah.
Well, and then early the next year, in early '78, then your Happy Days was carrying on. Then they introduced Mork. They brought in Robin Williams, and that had to be a direct pull of, well, everything's kind of space-oriented right now. Let's try this. So, and then that, of course, led to Mork and Mindy, but that was probably from that, and then.
Possibly, yeah.
Later on in '78, I think we got what was, the best thing that we got from that pull was Battlestar Galactica, the original TV series, which I thought was pretty darn good, and I really enjoyed it.
I know we've chatted about this over dinner a couple of times. You're a big fan of Battlestar Galactica, I think.
Well, I mean, I grew up with that one because it was, great to have something on TV that you could watch. Because, of course, younger people won't relate to this, but, back then, when you saw Star Wars and Star Wars in the theater, you saw it in the theater, and once it left, it was gone. You're not going to get to see it until it returns as a limited engagement.
Right,
there wasn't VCRs, and certainly wasn't anything to pull up on a computer or anything like that to watch. You had your chance, and after that, you had to relive it in toys or whatever. There was no seeing it again. So here we had Battlestar Galactica as a weekly show that you got your space fix.
Yeah.
And it was pretty darn, like I say, pretty darn interesting, especially as a 9-year-old for myself. It was really good.
I bet, yeah. So I've seen a couple of episodes of it, but I can't even remember it as a much younger kid. I still think of myself as a kid now. As a much younger kid in England, I can't remember seeing many episodes of it. Going back, however, to Star Wars, you reminded me now of. When the Death Star is destroyed in Star Wars, I've only known this twice in my life. When the Death Star was destroyed in Star Wars, I just remember the entire auditorium just jumping to its feet and clapping and screaming with delight. Like,
wow.
Whoa! Finally, the Death Star's been destroyed. And the only other time I remember that sort of reaction from a movie crowd was at the end of Jaws when the shark is killed. In the movie, it's a different ending in the book, but in the movie, when the oxygen tank is shot and the shark blows up again, I just remember that same reaction from the crowd, people jumping up and applauding and cheering. It was just a magical moment.
Yeah, that's when
only ever noticed
a movie in the theater is an amazing.
Yes, absolutely, yes, that reaction from the crowd.
Let's see, I saw Star Wars. I was too young to see Jaws in the theater. My mom wouldn't have had any interest in taking me to that anyway. But she did take me to Star Wars. And who knows? We probably went on a matinee. There probably was not a big crowd. I can't remember. But I saw all the 3 original Star Wars films, Star Wars Empire and Jedi, in Knoxville. And it's sadly all the theaters that I saw those in, which was 2 of them. I saw one in a twin cinema, the original, and then the Empire and Jedi in another twin cinema at another. But both have been long torn down.
Yeah.
Long gone.
Yeah.
So, but
of course, one of the other wonderful features of Star Wars, beyond the wonderful music itself, the soundtrack, is the sounds, the audio that was so unique. I mean, that with the lightsabers, it's just fantastic, and the unique, distinctive sounds of the laser blasters versus the sounds of the TIE fighters and the X-Wing craft, and everything had a unique. And now, if you hear those sounds, you'll know instantly what it is. Right? It made such a difference. They weren't just generic noises in any way.
Well, I remember they showed a special on TV, and I can't remember if it was after Star Wars, or it might have been around the time that Empire came out. But they talked about the special effects, and I think one of them was the guy wires on like a telephone pole, the tension wires.
Yes.
That if they come up with have a recording device and have a hammer or something like that, and hit that wire, and it makes one of the famous sounds. It might have been the laser blast or something. Drum, or something like that. That's where they.
You're exactly right. I think that's exactly what it was. Yeah, it was the high. Yes, it was the wire holding the telegraph pole up into position, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's tense and would just emit that when you hit it with a certain thing at a certain angle or something like that, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and doing a little bit of research, it made me think about ARC 2, so I looked it up fairly recently because I remember that as a kid. Lo and behold, it said the sounds inside the RV that they used to drive around are the same sound effects they use in the animated Star Trek series prior to that. Same company was the producer, so they just use the sound. So you'll recognize, if you're a fervent fan of the animated Star Trek series, if you listen or watch ARC 2, you'll recognize the sounds inside the RV, they say.
Oh, is that right? So, that's cool.
Yeah, a lot of crossover stuff. I do remember, I think, one episode of ARC 2, they encounter Robbie the Robot, which I'm sure, very familiar with.
Yeah, well, not very familiar with, but familiar, yeah.
I do, and that was probably the first time I ever saw him, because I'd never seen Forbidden Planet. And then was he ever in Lost in Space?
Yes, I think he was, I'm sure he was, actually.
Yeah. He wasn't the robot, but he was, I think, I don't know. Somebody
somewhere again is going,
he was like this.
Yeah.
We got Battlestar Galactica, and that was a big thing. And then, I think a year later, we got Buck Rogers, which was, of course, a reiteration.
Yes.
And they did that as a movie first, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and then they brought it out as a TV show probably later that year. I think probably as a summer movie, and it did well. And they brought back, Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray and all them, and made the series.
Yes.
And I still remember vividly watching that one. It's funny, at the very beginning of, you watch the opening, and I think it's not an exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, "The year is 1987. NASA launches the last of America's great space probes," and we're like going, 87? Well, that's how many years ago now? So
I know.
It was only less than 10 years away when they filmed it.
Yes. Well, I think many of those science fiction movies and franchises were all based in years that have already happened by now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I think Blade Runner 2019, I think?
I can't remember.
2020, something like that.
Well, they
So
had that reiteration of it, yeah.
So I think Blade Runners should have already happened. And
I
think
we're jumping around a little bit, but Escape from New York was supposed to be 1997.
Yes. And Mad Max, I think Mad Max has already happened or is very close to happening.
Wasn't it maybe 2020, and that explains a lot? I don't think they were too far off from what...
That's right, that explains... Yeah. Well, that explains a lot.
I know, it might not be too bad of a way to go. You know?
Yes. Did you ever imagine, as a much younger man, looking forward to 2021, that beyond the awfulness of the pandemic and all of that, but just the state of technology and the state of the world, did you ever imagine that 2021 would look as it does? No.
Of course, who would have thought anyway?
But it just gives I often think about this. It just gives an indication that how different will the world look in another 100 years?
Yeah.
Probably not that different.
Well, and of course, I mean, there's always the adage of, well, where's the flying cars? We were supposed to have flying cars by now, that kind of thing. The Jetsons promised us flying cars, But
that's right. I feel shortchanged, Wes.
But yet we do have the Zoom calls, and we have you can watch and speak to people on your watch. I mean, that's very Dick Tracy, very Jetsons, very a lot of things.
I was only watching Dick Tracy one day ago.
Really?
Yes, I was.
The movie or
the movie?
Oh, the movie. Warren Beatty movie.
Yeah, Warren Beatty movie. Yeah. With Madonna playing Breathless Mahoney.
That's right. That was it did not do that well at the theater.
No.
It was chock full of stars. What was it? Al Pacino was prune face or mumbles or whatever it was, or
no, he wasn't prune face, but he was one of the he was like the villain of the piece. But yes, it must have been a very expensive movie to make. Yes, and my understanding is it was never a terrific success.
No,
commercial success.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the numbers again, but I think it kind of flopped in a way. Yeah, and it had some. I'm sure it had a good amount of tie-ins to whatever back in the day, but I can't remember what they were now.
Yeah, but looking at that technology, the first time we may have chatted about this before, but the first time I ever remember seeing video chat, such as Zoom or pick your particular product, would be in 2001. I can remember that happening. One of the characters calls his wife, because I think it's his daughter's birthday, and they have a little chat on a video call. And I can remember thinking, wow, what an amazing thing that would be. And of course, here we are, commonplace. We're talking about the world being very different or not being very different, but you're right. I think technology, and again, that probably feeds on from what we're talking about, the somewhat basic looking computer screen technology that was in Star Wars and Star Trek at the time those franchises were made. The technology has moved on and communication has moved on in such a way. And when you think about the communicators in Star Trek, of course, it's just a flip phone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And here we are. Yeah, we still haven't got the transporter yet, but
well, I think I wasn't a big fan of this too, but I think when these kind of came out, they said how much they were like, and didn't they use a lot of tablets in Next Generation that looked just like iPods or iPads?
iPads, yes. Yeah.
They'd walk around with those things and the medical would scan you, I guess, but they would put in data and carry them around, and that's exactly what we carry around and do a lot of things with.
It sure is, yeah. And when I say we haven't got the transporter, but we do now have 3D printing. And I think that's probably the first step towards the transporter. Personally, I think it's coming. There's the technology, I think, in its very embryonic stage. But I wouldn't be surprised if in another 100 years or something.
Yeah. I don't want to be the guinea pig. I've seen The Fly, and I do not want to be any of the test subjects.
That's right. Moving away slightly from science fiction to science fact, but can you imagine what a tremendous boost for space travel and 3D printer must be, where now 3D printing has moved on so much that from those simple 3D wax to now using a metal matrix, almost like a titanium powder to produce components. Now, let's say, for example, one was on the moon or one was on Mars and a particular component broke, you could print a replacement for it rather than waiting 6 months, 9 months, a year for something to be sent from Earth. You can print whatever is broken. I mean, that's just I mean, that to me is a real game changer in terms of what we can do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything, if we look at some of the positive things that are going on in the world and the advancements, we're not, there are people working hard at giving us some amazing things in the near future. You know, it's going to be interesting to see on the cusp of, you know.
Yes, I'm longing for the day when humanity steps onto the surface of Mars. Boy, I hope that happens while I'm still around to see it. I would love that to be the case. What an amazing experience that would be for us all to see that.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see the process and who's going to be the one to, the team that will go and
yeah.
You know.
One of the most exciting things to me, just on a very personal level, selfish level really, when humanity returns to the surface of the moon, I'm longing to see a video footage of what the original landing sites from the Apollo missions look like.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be cool. To see what's still there. Will Armstrong's footprint still be in that moon dust?
Yeah. How's the flag doing?
Yeah. I think, what an amazing thing that would be.
Maybe get a $50 bonus if you can actually find the golf ball.
That's right.
That kind of thing. Well, and too, definitely the what do they call them, rovers?
Rovers.
Those are all sitting there. They didn't load those things back up.
Yeah.
That's a lot of cash sitting up there.
At least we hope they're still sitting there. Bum, bum, bum.
Wouldn't it be funny if we got there, they were up on blocks and the wheels were stolen?
I do remember many, many years ago, there was a very cheesy newspaper. I think it was called the Daily Sport in England. And it's a bit like the National Enquirer magazine, I think. One of their headlines one day was London double-decker bus found on the surface of the moon. And, of course, they had a very early Photoshop technology of a London double-decker bus on the lunar surface. Well, this to me did it for me. The week after, I think the headline was, London double-decker bus disappears from the moon, and there was just a picture of the moon there. I thought, that's great. What a great way to end the story.
Yeah.
And just take the bus away from the moon's surface, yeah. Yeah, it's a good conversation. I mean, as you said when we started chatting about science fiction, it's one of those subjects that we can just chat about endlessly. Oh, so many different.
Like I say, it has such a subculture that it could go on forever, and we haven't even touched on numerous shows and movies in that genre. But that's kind of like my introduction and what got me. Like I said, that once 77 hit in Star Wars, and my growing up was a big turning point.
And for me, I would say my first real introduction to science fiction would be Doctor Who. And I can remember the early Doctor Who's from the 60s, original black and white shows. They caught everybody's attention in England. I don't know if it even showed, if they were screened over in the States, those early Doctor Who episodes from the 60s and 70s. But
the first one I recall saw, let's say it was sometime in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And it was whatever iteration, the guy with the big brown curly hair?
Yes, the fourth Doctor, I think, yes.
And I remember it being on, and they showed some scene where it was supposed to be a warship, and you could tell it was a model that was about 12 inches long in a bathtub. And I said, I'm out. I can't do this. And that was that was the end of it for me.
I think that was the BBC special effects in full effect, because unlike Star Wars and everything else, the BBC never had any real budget. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to make best use of everything they could to save a penny to produce these shows. Yes, and I do remember the doctor you're describing was Tom Baker, a chap called Tom Baker. He used a great big scarf, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, big long coat and scarf. And before him, Doctor number 3, John Pertwee. So that was my era, really, 3 and 4. But I remember characters like Cybermen, who were supposed to be a sort of combination of half human, half robot, where a species was working to replace all the parts of the body that would break down eventually and replace them with computer technology or whatever it would be. And I remember a lot of those characters would walk around wearing Dr. Martin boots, like workman boots that were obviously sprayed with silver paint, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes. lots of rocks. The falling rocks were all made of polystyrene, and you could hear them sounding like polystyrene as well. very little, I guess, very little budget for special effects. But
well, and I'm sure that the people that are very much into it, that's a major part of the charm. Was all the
major part of the charm.
Yeah, and I'm sure they appreciate that. And I'm sure the newest iterations they're doing of it with the special effects and budgets they have now is probably fantastic and amazing. It's just something I guess I never picked up on.
In comparison, I do remember going to Blackpool in the north of England for a holiday with my parents, which very popular destination in England for annual holidays. And they had a Doctor Who exhibition, and I think we were there for a week. And I remember spending all my pocket money every day. I would just go in through the Doctor Who exhibition and walk around and just...
How old were you then?
10.
Okay.
I would guess something like that. And they had Daleks in there, and they had the Silurians in there, and again the Cybermen were in there, and waxworks of the different Doctors. I was just fascinated with all of it. And again, something else that we've chatted about to this day, that I think that working in a props department, especially now in the movies in 2021, must be just so thrilling to make things and just play. Basically just playing and just being a big kid, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would love it.
I think it would be fantastic. Well, we better begin to wrap this up, haven't we?
I think so. Yeah, I think
that was a fun conversation.
We scratched the surface, but it was fun. It got us a very enjoyable episode.
I suspect we will return, gentle listener, to this conversation for science fiction in the future, because like you just said, Kevin, it's such a vast subject, and we're all in love with science fiction. Oh, yeah, we just did it. Wonderful. All right, do please join us again on another episode of Matthew and the Other Guy. Bye for now.
See you next time.